I made a video a few weeks ago on the physiological adaptations to microgravity. To recap that video, I'm going to go over a few things pretty quick. So some of the major changes that do happen to an adult mature human in microgravity are the deloading of your bones, so your bones get weaker, and that's due to the piezoelectric properties of your calcium crystal not getting the tug of 1G, and the osteoblasts and osteoclasts have to follow different patterns to lay down and break down bone. Another thing is the selective atrophy of certain types of muscle, skeletal muscle. That's the muscle you use to move your hands and stuff. You selectively lose your endurance fibers or your slow glycolytic fibers. Those are your endurance fibers, and you selectively lose them. But also there are smooth muscle changes to your circulatory system, and that's pretty wild because that changes the amount of blood that gets to your brain and down to your body, whether they're pooling in your feet and you get, return to flow back to the heart. Now with Elon Musk redoubling his efforts for a permanent Mars colony, and now with him being a father, there are some ethical questions on when it is appropriate to take a developing child to microgravity, because you might be damning that child to horrible physical, injury. And the major things that pop up in my mind are kids, along with the osteoblasts and osteoclastic activity of their bones. They're deloading their bones, but there's also epiphyseal plates, and that's where the plates join together. So you always tell kids not to lift heavy weights at the gym, right? Because they're going to pop that plate and then they stop the bone growth in long bones. Now, for normal bone growth with the physioelectric properties of calcium and osteoblasts and osteoclasts, you need 1/3 the weight to break a long bone longwise to get any kind of adaptation to strengthen it. Now with the epiphyseal plate, now with the unrestricted, with no gravity pushing it back together after it grows, shrinking, growing, you could have humans that are 10+ feet tall, and then that would limit the kind of environment they could step down to. Would they be able to walk on Earth again without some sort of prosthetic? Now another thing that pops to my mind is muscle patterning, the types and the ratio of specific types of muscles, fast twitch, fast glycolytic, slow glycolytic, which are my preferred terms. I might slip into that. That just means what energy system they're using to contract, whether it's slow glycolytic, aerobic, or fast glycolytic, anaerobic. Now there's evidence to support that there's kind of a golden window for kids, depending on the type of activity, whether they're doing high intense activity or whether they're doing long endurance, easy activity, what type and what ratio of muscle fibers they're going to have. Like, are they going to have a dominance of endurance fibers or a dominance of, high intensity fibers? And there's a lot of mystery on that. We do know there's neurogenesis that does happen in kids and humans and adults, but we don't know the effects of different environments would have on the ratio of those fibers and how that's going to affect it. Would they lose the types of patterns that make humans so environmentally savvy? We don't know. And that's kind of scary. That's a scary thought, what kind of muscle fibers they're going to have. I would guess that since there are deloading and microgravity, that they would limit the amount, their body would naturally limit the amount of endurance fibers. Now those are the selective fibers that you already lose predominantly when you detrain in microgravity or just on your couch. Now there's also circulatory muscle changes that happen around the lumen of your vessel. So like blood goes through, the muscle around it contracts or expands, allowing different kinds of flow of blood. The expiration of metabolic waste, the flow of good nutrients to your body. Now that changes with microgravity, and it's covered in my first video a little more in depth, and I'm going to go into it now. But we got to consider, if we take a developing child to microgravity, would we be damning them to forever be prisoners of microgravity in space? They'd never be able to walk back on Earth, or maybe even another Mars-like planet if they spend prolonged time in microgravity. We don't, in like free-fall space. Like, what if it takes too long to get there, and by the time they get to Mars, they can't handle even 1/3 of Earth's normal gravity tugging at you? And this comes to the ethical question of Elon Musk's kid. He might be the youngest astronaut ever. Who knows? That's kind of cool. Is that worth it? Maybe. Elon Musk is kind of playing fast and loose with the human experiment, which is how the human experiment should be done, in my opinion. It's kind of going to be interesting to see how we're going to mitigate these changes in space and what we're going to do to what's going to happen to them in space. Going back to the epiphyseal plates in bones, the first thing that pops in my mind kind of jokingly is the Futurama episode where they unfreeze that 80s business guy and he has bonitis. Like, who knows, maybe without that tug of gravity, those epiphyseal plates will go hog wild and grow and get 12-foot humans, and they'll never be able to step foot on Earth again without breaking every bone and weight-bearing bone in their body. Huge humans looming over us like aliens. The selective atrophy of those endurance fibers could also play a role. Those endurance fibers are what makes humans dominant on Earth, where we can outrun, not in a sprint, but we can outrun in a long pace most other mammals, which is how we were able to hunt down prey for days and days and days, just running, away from predators, because we are still prey. The other thing is, what kind of suits could we have to mitigate these effects in microgravity? Some sort of exoskeleton suit when they go back to 1G and they have to wear these huge bubbles and suits because their bodies aren't used to weight bearing, floating in some sort of membranic fluid. Or maybe like a still suit from Dune with like pumping and osmotic actions as you walk that apply different kind of pressures to just certain parts of your body that mimic the effects of gravity. Now, if we do go to space and the first generation born on Mars is forever isolated to either microgravity, free-fall space, or that 1/3 gravity of Mars approximately, we're damning the future of humanity to the environments we settle in for generations. Now, if that's the case, they're going to need some sort of ex machina to get us to the Star Trek level where we can have colonies on different planets and live throughout the galaxy. But it's going to be a hard struggle full of suffering and mutation and, defects, growing defects and developing people, and they develop in these environments. We really don't know what's going to happen. And that's kind of wild. Maybe an infinite prison sentence in space where you're forever isolated in space in your community, never being able to step foot back on an Earth-like planet ever again would be an adventure, but it's going to forever change our species. And living at the cusp of this divergence, Earth-bound, space-bound civilization, it's going to be wild to kind of see. I wish I could live 100 generations and watch and study the effects of microgravity on Martians or space travelers. Imagine someone born on the moon. If we ever colonized the moon, they wouldn't even be able to go to Mars because the moon has even less gravity. So they'd be used to that 1G of the moon, whatever percentage of gravity on Earth that is, and they wouldn't even be able to go to Mars because Mars is bigger than the moon but smaller than the Earth, and the Earth is totally out of the question. We might be geographically isolating ourselves on different planets in our solar system for prolonged times during this point of expansion celestially. These are just the kind of crazy thoughts that go through my head when it comes to physiology and the human experience and the different environments we can survive in, but also how the environments fight back on us. And what kind of tools we can use to fight back against the environment to try to maintain a normal homeostatic physiology in our body as we travel the stars.